They say grief is like the ocean. It comes in waves, sometimes gentle, sometimes violent enough to drown you. But for me, grief was an ocean. It was a fire, a slow, burning fire that started the moment the police officer called me at 3 a.m., and it turned into an inferno the day I stood at my son's grave. After my son's funeral, while the earth was still fresh on his casket, she walked up to me. She didn't offer a hug. She didn't offer a tissue. She hissed at me like a snake in the grass. "The 50 million will be mine. You won't get anything." The people standing around us froze in shock. The air in the room seemed to suck out, leaving only the heavy, suffocating scent of lilies and the stench of her hypocrisy. But I just smiled, a slow, tired smile that didn't reach my eyes. She didn't know yet that her words, those venomous, greedy little words, were the beginning of the end. She thought she was staring at a defeated old man who had just lost his only child. She didn't realize she was staring at the architect of her total destruction. When a lawyer finally uttered those two fateful words the next morning, everything in the room changed forever. The color drained from her face, her arrogance crumbled into dust, and for the first time, she realized she had made a fatal mistake. Before I tell you how I destroyed her with her own greed, please subscribe to the channel. It helps us share these stories of justice. And tell me in the comments, what time is it where you are watching this right now? The lilies were suffocating. Their sickly sweet smell filled the chapel at Henderson Funeral Home, hanging in the humid air like a physical weight. It mixed with the hushed murmur of voices I didn't want to hear, the polite, rehearsed whispers of people who didn't know what to say, so they said the same empty things over and over again. "I'm so sorry for your loss. He was so young. If there's anything we can do..." I nodded at them, robotically shaking hands. But my mind wasn't in the room. I stood at Derek's casket, my hand resting on the polished mahogany, feeling the cool, smooth wood under my palm. I was studying my son's face one final time. They'd done good work, the morticians. He looked peaceful, his features relaxed, almost like he was just taking a nap after a long day at the firm. That was a lie, of course. Nothing about a 38-year-old man dying in a Tesla crash on I-95 at 2 a.m. was peaceful. The violence of it, the suddenness of it, haunted me. 1 week. It had been exactly 7 days since the police called. 7 days since the officer's voice on the other end of the line shattered my universe into a million jagged pieces. 7 days since I had to drive to the morgue and identify the body of the boy I taught to fish, the teenager I taught to drive, the man I watched build a legal empire from nothing. The funeral director had positioned the casket perfectly, angled so mourners could file past, offer their condolences to the family, and move along. A production line of grief. I watched them come and go. Derek's colleagues from his law firm, men in expensive Italian suits checking their watches surreptitiously, already thinking about their next meeting. Old friends from college who looked older and sadder than I remembered, their youth gone, replaced by the heavy realization of mortality. Neighbors from the Gables who whisper about property values even now, wondering what would happen to the mansion. They squeezed my shoulder, mumbled about tragedy and loss, and I nodded. My throat was too tight for words. I felt like a ghost in my own life, watching a scene from a movie I didn't want to be in. Then I saw her. Jennifer, my daughter-in-law, stood near the back of the chapel, wrapped in a black Chanel dress that was cut just a little too low, fitted just a little too tight. It probably cost more than the casket itself. Her makeup was flawless, foundation smooth as porcelain, eyeliner sharp enough to cut glass, lips painted a subdued wine color. I stared at her, watching, waiting. I was waiting for a crack in the mask, waiting for a red rim around the eyes from crying all night, waiting for a tremble in the lip, a tissue clutched in a shaking hand. Anything that showed she felt the same gaping hole in the world that I did. But there was nothing. Not a tear had touched that face. Not one. Her eyes were clear, sharp, calculating. She was whispering to her mother, Susan, both of them leaning close like conspirators at a cocktail party, heads bent together. Susan wore pearls, a double strand of white pearls against her black dress. It was a small detail, insignificant to anyone else, but it burned me. Pearls at my son's funeral. Who wears jewelry meant for a gala, to bury a young man? People who are celebrating, That's who. People who see a funeral not as an end, but as a payday. I turned back to Derek, my hand trembling slightly on the wood of the casket. I leaned down, my voice barely a breath. I'm sorry, I whispered to the cold silence. I tried to warn you. I tried to tell you she wasn't the one. I'm so sorry I couldn't save you. The service began. The funeral director, a solemn man with practiced empathy, guided everyone to their seats. I sat in the front row alone, the empty space beside me feeling vast and cold. Jennifer took the second row. Her choice, not mine. She didn't want to sit next to the grieving father. She wanted to sit with her mother, her ally. Throughout the eulogy, I felt her presence behind me like a cold draft on the back of my neck. The minister spoke about Derek's accomplishments, his brilliance as an attorney, his generosity to local charities, the way he could light up a room with his laugh. All true, all meaningless now that he was gone. I didn't turn around, but I heard it. The buzz. Beezizity, beezizity. Her phone. It vibrated against the wooden pew behind me. Then silence. Then again. Beezizity. Then the soft, rhythmic tap of thumbs on glass. Tap, tap, tap. While the minister spoke of my son's soul ascending to heaven, his wife was texting, checking emails, responding to condolences, or checking her bank balance. I clenched my jaw so hard my teeth ached. The disrespect was palpable, a physical weight in the air. When the final M faded, Amazing Grace, Derek's favorite, and the guests began filing past the casket again for final goodbye. I stood up. My knees popped. I felt every single one of my 68 years in that moment. I accepted embraces I didn't want, hearing words that slid past me like water off a stone. Then the crowd thinned. The funeral director touched my elbow gently, his touch light and professional, indicating it was time. Time to close the casket. Time to let go. I placed both hands on the mahogany edge. The wood was cool to the touch. I looked at Derek one last time, memorizing the curve of his nose, the set of his jaw. I love you, I said quietly. Rest now. I'll take care of the rest. Then I stepped back. That's when Jennifer approached. She moved through the thinning crowd with purpose, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. Click, click, click. A rhythm of impatience that echoed in the quiet chapel. Susan trailed behind her, that same faint, satisfied smirk playing at her lips. I watched them come, measuring their expressions. Jennifer's face held no grief, only irritation, like she was dealing with an inconvenient business meeting that had run overtime. She stopped 3 feet from me, arms crossed over her chest, a pose of defensive arrogance. You could have at least booked a better venue, she said. Her voice wasn't a whisper. It carried across the room, sharp and clear, cutting through the somber atmosphere. Derek deserves something more than this budget funeral home. It's embarrassing. I felt my jaw tighten. Around us, the remaining guests froze mid-conversation. Eyes turned toward us. The air grew thick with tension. I organized everything. I said, my voice was steady, factual, betraying none of the rage boiling beneath the surface. I paid for everything. You couldn't even manage that much. You were too busy. Her eyes flashed dangerous fire. I was grieving, Robert. Unlike some people, I actually loved my husband. I was too distraught to handle logistics. The accusation landed like a physical slap. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. I said nothing. What could I say? That I'd noticed her dry eyes? That I'd heard her phone buzzing while the priest prayed? That grief looked different on someone who'd actually lost something precious versus someone who had lost an ATM? Susan moved closer to her daughter, her hand touching Jennifer's elbow in a gesture of theatrical support. She looked around at the few remaining guests, making sure she had an audience. Poor Jennifer, she said, loud enough for them to hear. She's barely holding it together. She'll finally get what she deserves after putting up with all this. Putting up with all this. Putting up with my son, the man who gave them everything. The man who bought them cars, houses, jewelry. The man who loved her when she didn't deserve it. Jennifer took a step closer. Now we were 2 feet apart. She leaned in and her perfume, something heavy, floral, and expensive, cloyed in my throat. She lowered her voice, dropping the performance for just a second. Don't think you're in charge here, she hissed. The steel in her voice was sharp enough to draw blood. Everything will change very soon. You're just a guest in my life now. My hands formed fists at my sides. I felt the nails digging into my palms. I didn't raise them, didn't move, just stood there, returning her stare with flat, dead gaze, letting the silence stretch between us. She waited for a response. She wanted to fight. She wanted me to yell so she could play the victim. When none came, she scoffed, turned on her heel, and walked away. Susan followed like a shadow, casting one last disdainful look in my direction. Everything will change very soon. She thought I didn't understand. She thought I was just a grieving old man, too broken by the loss of his son to see the sharks circling in the water. But she was wrong. I'd watched her for 5 years. I'd seen how she looked at Derek's assets, how she spent his money, how she cataloged everything he owned like items on a shopping list. I exhaled slowly, releasing the breath I felt I'd been holding for a week. The war was coming. She just declared it. And God help me, I was ready. The reception was held at Derek's house, the $8 million mansion he bought 3 years ago in Coral Gables. It was a stunning property, all glass and white stone, modern and cold, reflecting the late afternoon sun like a mirror. I remembered walking through the empty rooms with him when he bought it. He talked about filling it with family, with children running down the halls. Now it felt like a mausoleum, a monument to a future that would never happen. Cars lined the circular driveway, luxury sedans, sports cars. The valet Jennifer hired, a valet for funeral reception, took my keys without meeting my eyes. I walked through the front door alone. The entryway held massive arrangements of white roses and lilies transplanted from a funeral home. Their smell followed me inside, heavy and sickening. Guests clustered in the living room beyond. Voices were a low hum of forced conversation, the clinking of glasses, the polite laughter that felt jagged in the air. I moved through them, accepting brief condolences, nodding at faces I recognized but couldn't name. Then I heard her laugh. It was a bright, sharp sound, a sound that belonged at a birthday party, not a wake. Jennifer stood in the center of the living room, phone pressed to her ear, surrounded by 3 of her friends. Her designer sunglasses were pushed up on her head. She held a champagne flute in her free hand, the bubbles catching the light. "I'm thinking the new Hermes bag," she said into the phone, laughing. "The burgundy one." "Yes, I'll text you the link." "No, don't worry about the price. The funeral's almost over anyway. Such a drag, honestly. I'm exhausted." I stopped walking. I stood perfectly still, watching her gesture with the champagne glass, watching her friends nod and smile. She was treating my son's funeral reception like an interruption to her shopping schedule, like a boring meeting she had to sit through before she could get back to spending his money. A waiter passed with a tray of drinks. I took one, whiskey neat, and moved to the windows overlooking Derek's garden, the garden he'd planted himself. Native palms, birds of paradise, a small fountain he bought at an estate sale in Coconut Grove. I remembered helping him install it, both of us sunburned and laughing, water spraying everywhere as we tried to connect the pump. Robert. Susan's voice cut through my thoughts like a knife. I turned slowly. She stood 3 feet away, that same smirk from the funeral still playing at her lips. She held a plate of canapes, picking at them delicately with manicured fingers. "Robert," she repeated, stepping closer. Her voice took on a saccharine quality, dripping with fake sweetness. "You look tired. You really should go home and rest." "I'm fine, Susan," I said, turning back the window. "Well," she continued, undeterred, "when Jennifer gets what's rightfully hers, things are going to change around here. She's planning to redecorate, get rid of some of this old clutter." She gestured vaguely at the house Derek had designed. "And maybe," she added, her voice dropping to a whisper, "maybe you can visit the grandchildren sometimes. If you behave properly, of course." The grandchildren, the ones that didn't exist. Jennifer had postponed them for 5 years, always saying she wasn't ready, that Derek's career came first, that there was plenty of time. Now I understood. She'd never wanted Derek's children, just his money, just his house. Just everything he'd built. She used the idea of grandchildren as leverage, a carrot to dangle in front of Derek to keep him working, keep him buying. I looked at Susan steadily, saying nothing. Let her fill the silence. Let her show me exactly who she was. Of course, that depends on whether you're reasonable, she continued, unsettled by my silence. Jennifer's been through so much. She deserves to move forward without interference from people who don't understand their place. My hands tightened around the whiskey glass. The ice clinked softly. I took a slow sip, tasting nothing, and continued to stare at her. Well, she said finally, flustered by my lack of reaction, I suppose we'll see how things unfold tomorrow. Tomorrow? The reading, she said, her eyes gleaming. Arthur Patterson called. 10 a.m. Don't be late. The will reading. The lawyer, Derek's lawyer, Arthur Patterson, had called 3 days ago. Tomorrow at 10 a.m., his office in downtown Miami. Jennifer would be there. Susan, too, probably. Both of them expecting their payday. Both of them counting the millions before they were even in the bank. Susan walked away, disappearing into a cluster of guests near the bar. I turned back to the window, back to Derek's garden. The sun was setting now, casting long shadows across the fountain. Around me, Jennifer's friends laughed too loudly. Someone turned on music, soft jazz that felt obscene in its cheerfulness. More champagne appeared. They thought they'd won. They thought tomorrow would bring them everything. Jennifer with her smirks and her shopping lists. Susan with her veiled threats. Let them think it. Let them celebrate. Let them reveal exactly how far their greed extended. I took a final sip of whiskey and set the glass on the windowsill. Tomorrow would be interesting. The next morning, the humidity in Miami was oppressive. I took the elevator up 40 floors to the offices of Phillips and Associates. Through the glass walls, the city spread below like a grid of ambition and money. I watched the financial district shimmer in the mid-morning heat and wondered if Derek had stood in the same elevator 3 months ago, rehearsing what he'd tell Warren Phillips. The doors opened onto polished marble. Phillips and Associates occupied the entire floor. Glass partitions, leather furniture, the sterile atmosphere of serious wealth. The receptionist recognized me immediately. Mr. Gray, Mr. Phillips is expecting you. Conference room 3. I followed her down a corridor lined with abstract art. The conference room overlooked Biscayne Bay. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the long mahogany table. Jennifer was already there. She sat with her back to the view, Susan beside her, both of them dressed like they were attending a charity luncheon. Jennifer wore cream Valentino, a sharp contrast to the black she wore yesterday. Susan had chosen navy Armani. They looked up as I entered, and Jennifer's expression transformed into something predatory. Robert, she said. She didn't stand. How punctual. I took the chair across from her, placing my hands flat on the table, neutral, calm, revealing nothing. Warren Phillips entered moments later, a legal assistant trailing behind him. Warren was silver-haired, late 50s, wearing a suit that whispered rather than shouted. He'd been Derek's attorney for 8 years. He nodded at me, just a brief acknowledgement, but something passed between us. Understanding, maybe, or confirmation. Thank you all for coming, Warren said, settling into his chair at the head of the table. We are here for the reading of the last will and testament of Derek Thomas Gray. Jennifer sighed dramatically. She checked her watch, a diamond-encrusted Cartier that Derek had bought her for their anniversary. I hope this won't take long. I have a salon appointment at 2. Warren's expression didn't change. The process takes as long as it takes, Mrs. Gray. Well, let's get to the important part, then. Jennifer crossed her legs, her heel bouncing impatiently. We all know how this goes. Spousal inheritance. Let's just sign the papers, so I can get on with my life. Susan leaned over, whispering something. Jennifer smiled, that same self-satisfied expression from the funeral, the look of someone counting money that wasn't hers yet. Warren opened the folder before him. Inside was Derek's future, or what Jennifer thought was her future. The will was executed 3 months ago, Warren began, properly witnessed and notarized according to Florida state law. 3 months ago. The phrase echoed in my mind. pulling me backward. Late June. Derek had shown up at my house after 10 p.m. He looked troubled. Not frightened exactly, but determined. "Dad," he had said, sitting on my terrace, "I did something important today. Something I should have done a long time ago." I hadn't understood then. Now, looking at the folder in Warren's hands, "I did. Total estimated value of all assets," Warren read, pulling me back to the present. $48,700,000. The room felt smaller suddenly. The numbers hung in the air like physical objects. Jennifer leaned forward. Her expression had transformed into something rapacious. "Hungry." She turned slowly toward me, and when she spoke, her voice dripped with venom. "50 million will be mine," she hissed, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You get nothing. Time for you to understand your place. Old man, you can go back to your little house and rot." Susan giggled. Actually giggled. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. My hands remained flat on the table. I simply looked at Warren, and a small smile touched my lips. "Should I tell them?" I asked quietly. "Or would you prefer to?" Jennifer's head snapped toward me, confusion flickering across her face. "What?" Warren looked down at the document. He found his place. "All aforementioned property and assets," he read, his voice clear and formal. "I, Derek Thomas Gray, bequeath to my father, Robert William Gray." Silence. Complete, crushing silence. I watched Jennifer's face cycle through emotions in rapid succession. Confusion. Comprehension. Horror. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. Then she screamed. "What?" Jennifer's voice shattered the silence like glass exploding. She lunged forward, her hands slamming onto the table. "That's impossible. He couldn't. I'm his wife." "Mrs. Gray?" Warren remained perfectly still. "No." Jennifer snatched the will from Warren's hands, her eyes racing across the pages. "This is wrong. There's a mistake. Where does it say?" She flipped pages frantically, her manicured nails scraping against the paper. "This can't be legal." Susan shrieked. "She's a spouse. She has rights. You can't just cut out a wife." "The will was properly executed," Warren said calmly, taking the document back from her shaking hands. 3 months ago. Additionally, Mrs. Gray, prior to your marriage, you signed a prenuptial agreement." Jennifer froze. "That was just paperwork," she yelled. "Derek said it was standard. He said it didn't matter." "It is binding," Warren said. "It specifies that in the event of Mr. Gray's death, his separate property passes according to his will, not spousal inheritance laws. You signed it. Your attorney reviewed it. It is enforceable. I signed that 5 years ago." Jennifer's voice climbed higher. I wasn't. "The terms remain enforceable," Warren said. "You did this." Jennifer screamed, turning on me. Her face was red, veins bulging in her neck. "You poisoned him against me. You turned him." "I did nothing," I said quietly, standing up slowly. "Derek made his own choices. He wouldn't have done this if you were the wife you pretended to be. You spent his money, Jennifer. You treated him like a bank account. And he finally saw it." "I'll sue," she hissed. "I'll contest this will. I'll fight you in every court in Florida. I'll prove he wasn't in his right mind. I'll prove you manipulated him." "Try," I said. One word. That's all it took. One word delivered with absolute certainty. "My son was a brilliant attorney, Jennifer." I continued. "Do you really think he'd leave any loopholes? Any opening for you to exploit? He knew you'd try. He prepared for it." "You have 30 days to vacate the property," Warren added, closing the folder. "That is standard under Florida law. 30 days. Jennifer's voice cracked. "Where am I supposed to go?" "That's not Mr. Gray's concern," Warren said simply. Jennifer stared at me with something beyond hatred. It was pure, raw desperation. She looked at the luxury around her, at the view of the city she thought she owned, and realized it was all slipping away. I walked out of the room, leaving her screaming behind the glass doors. I didn't look back. The victory felt good, but I knew it wasn't over. Jennifer wasn't the type to go quietly. She was a fighter, fueled by greed and entitlement. My phone started ringing the next evening. It was Michael Chun, a business associate of Derek's. "Robert," he said, "Jennifer Gray just walked into the offices of Wright and Associates." Marcus Wright took the meeting. Marcus Wright, one of Miami's most expensive, aggressive estate litigation attorneys. He was known for dragging cases out for years, draining estates until there was nothing left. Jennifer was throwing money at the problem. Derek's money, likely drained from joint accounts before they were frozen. 3 days later, the lawsuit arrived. A young man served me the papers at my door. Complaint to contest will. Jennifer Gray versus Robert Gray. I sat at Derek's old childhood desk and read the arguments. Count 1, mental instability. She claimed Derek was suffering from severe depression and cognitive decline. Count 2, undue influence. She claimed I had isolated Derek in his grief and manipulated him into changing the will. Count 3, spousal elective share. She claimed the prenup was invalid because she signed it under duress. It was a work of fiction, but a dangerous one. If a judge believed even a fraction of it, the will could be overturned. I called Warren. She's suing. Undue influence. Mental instability. "I know," Warren said. "We expected this. But we need to counter. We need proof. Not just legal arguments. Robert, we need dirt. We need to prove who she really is." "I'll get it," I said. I remember the conversation with Derek. 2 months before he died, he had come to my terrace, looking like a man carrying the weight of the world. "Dad," he'd said, "I think Jennifer's cheating on me with Brian, my business partner." He had hired a detective. He had gathered evidence. But I needed more. I needed to know everything. I hired Barbara Stewart, a private investigator with 25 years of experience. We met at a cafe in Coconut Grove. She was efficient, sharp, a woman who didn't waste time. I need to know who she really is. I told her. Before Derek. During the marriage. Everything. Turn over every rock. 3 days later, Barbara came to my house. She carried a thick leather portfolio. "Your instincts were correct," Barbara said. She laid out the documents on the desk. First, the history. Jennifer wasn't just a gold digger. She was a professional, a pattern of targeting wealthy men. A previous marriage to a real estate developer that lasted 18 months and cost him $4 million in a settlement. She had done this before. Then the finances. Barbara laid out bank statements. Systematic withdrawals. She said, $2 million moved from the joint account to her personal account over the last 14 months. Look at the dates. It accelerated 3 months before he died. She knew something was coming, or she was planning to leave him. And finally, the affair. Barbara spread photographs across the desk. Jennifer and Brian Kelly, at dinner, entering his apartment, kissing in a car. The timestamps were damning, all from the last 6 months of Derek's life. "I also have phone records," Barbara said. 73 calls to Brian Kelly in the month before Derek died, some lasting over an hour. I looked at the photos. My son had known. He had lived with his betrayal, forcing a smile while he built his legal defense. He had protected his legacy while his heart was breaking. "We have enough," I told Warren the next morning. "File a counterclaim. Embezzlement. Marital infidelity affecting property rights. And we want the $2 million back." The hearing was set for August 26. The Miami-Dade County Courthouse was a monolith of concrete and glass. I wore my Navy suit, conservative, respectful. We met Marcus Wright in the hallway. He looked confident, smug. Jennifer stood beside him, dressed in a modest dark dress, her hair in a bun. The grieving widow costume was back. She glared at me, her eyes hard. "You'll regret this," she hissed as we passed. "I'll take everything. You'll be living on the street by the time I'm done with you. See you in there," I said calmly. Inside, the courtroom was cold. The judge entered. Marcus Wright stood up and gave a polished speech. He painted Jennifer as a victim, a devoted wife cast aside by a manipulative father-in-law. He spoke of spousal rights and mental instability. It was a good performance. If I didn't know the truth, I might have believed him. Then it was Warren's turn. Your Honor, Warren said, standing slowly, we are alleging embezzlement of marital assets and infidelity. He walked to the bench and laid down the first set of documents. These are bank statements. Systematic transfers totaling $2 million from joint accounts to Mrs. Gray's personal account. The judge put on her glasses. She flipped through the pages. These transfers spanned 14 months? Yes, Your Honor. Escalating significantly before Mr. Gray's death. This was not household spending. This was theft. Then, Warren produced the photographs. These document Mrs. Gray's relationship with Brian Kelly, the deceased business partner. He handed them over one by one. Restaurant, apartment, car. The judge examined each one. Her expression remained professional, but her eyes darted at Jennifer with clear understanding. In the gallery, Susan went pale. Finally, Warren picked up a letter. Your Honor, he said, this letter was delivered to my office by Derek Gray 1 month before his death, notarized and filed. It explains the state of mind perfectly. Read it, the judge said. Warren's voice filled the silent courtroom. I have discovered my wife's infidelity with my business partner, Brian Kelly. Investigation confirmed my suspicions. I must protect the family assets my father and I built over decades. Jennifer married me for financial gain. This is now obvious. This will ensure those assets remain with the family who earned them. You could hear a pin drop. Jennifer's face had drained of all color. She gripped the table so hard her knuckles were white. Marcus Wright leaned back in his chair, looking defeated. He knew he had lost. I need tonight to review the evidence, the judge said, her voice tight. We reconvene tomorrow morning for my ruling. As the judge left, Jennifer turned to Marcus Wright. How did they get those? You said we had a case. You said we would win. The evidence is legitimate, Wright whispered, gathering his papers. There's nothing I can do. They proved everything. The next morning, the courtroom was packed. Everyone wanted to see the end of the high-profile estate battle. But Warren had one last surprise. Your Honor, I call Brian Kelly to the stand. A ripple of shock went through the room. Jennifer gasped. Brian Kelly walked to the stand, looking like a man walking to the gallows. He was pale, shaking. He was sworn in. Mr. Kelly, Warren asked, were you involved with Jennifer Gray during her marriage? Yes, Brian whispered. Did she discuss her marriage with you? Sometimes, Brian said, looking at the floor. What did she say? Did she speak lovingly of her husband? Brian hesitated. Then, quietly, she complained. She said he was boring. She said things would be better when Derek freed us. Freed you how? Warren pressed. Through divorce, Brian stammered. Or whatever. Or whatever. The words hung in the air like poison gas. The gallery erupted in whispers. Or whatever implied death. It implied she was waiting for him to die. The judge banged her gavel hard. She didn't need to hear any more. She stared at Jennifer for a long moment, her eyes filled with disgust. I have heard enough, the judge said. She didn't even need to consult her notes. The last will and testament of Derek Thomas Gray is valid, she ruled. Mrs. Gray is entitled to nothing from the estate except her personal property. Furthermore, based on the evidence of embezzlement, she is ordered to return $2 million to the estate within 90 days. Failure to comply will result in criminal prosecution. Jennifer made a sound, a half sob, half gasp. She stood abruptly, knocking over a chair, and rushed from the courtroom. Susan followed, weeping openly. It was over. I walked out of the courthouse into the bright Miami sun. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel joy. I just felt clean, like a storm had finally passed. Jennifer left Miami a week later. She was bankrupt from legal fees. Susan went back to her old apartment. Brian Kelly's business reputation was destroyed. His firm collapsed within months. I sold the mansion. I couldn't bear to walk through those empty halls anymore. With the proceeds, nearly $40 million, I did what Derek would have wanted. I established the Derek Gray Memorial Foundation, $30 million dedicated to funding young entrepreneurs from disadvantaged backgrounds. Kids who had the drive but not the means. Kids like Derek was when he started. One evening, 6 months later, I stood on the balcony of my new, smaller apartment. The sun was setting over the ocean, painting the sky in purples and oranges. I held a photograph of Derek, 6 years old, sitting on my shoulders, laughing. "We did it," I whispered to the empty air, "just like you planned. She lost, and you won." The legal victory hadn't brought him back. The money didn't matter, but his name was now attached to hope, to success, to future generations building something real. His absence remained a hole in my heart that would never heal, but his legacy, that was safe. And for a father who had lost everything, that was enough. Sometimes justice doesn't roar. It waits, it plans, and then it strikes. If this story moved you, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. And I want to know, if you were in my shoes, would you have forgiven her, or would you have taken every penny like I did? Let me know in the comment below. Click the video on your screen now to hear another story of betrayal and revenge. Thank you for watching.